This week on Startup Security Weekly, we welcome special guest Doug White, and we're going to talk about security in startups and funding for security startups and whether or not security companies are getting funding, among a lot of other topics that I'm sure will come up, as well as losing limbs, which is one that comes up on shows that Doug is on for some reason.
Yay.
So for all that and more, stay tuned. This is a Security Weekly production. Welcome everyone to Startup Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Here with me in studio for this very special edition of Startup Security Weekly is Doug White. Doug, welcome to Startup Security Weekly. You're all over the network.
I tell you, they can't keep me under control here. It's just like, well, once I was...
You're one of the few that's actually now been on the three different... We get each on Hack Naked TV to kind of round it out, and then...
Like, why not? We do it all.
That's it. And Michael Santarcangelo, of course, is on the lines via Skype, broadcasting from the beach. Michael, how are you?
Good, man. I'm on a beach. The day I tell you it's not good is the day a hurricane actually hits us.
That's it.
I'm good.
So we've got stuff to talk about, not as much pointed stuff or articles as we usually have, but I think it's good to have kind of a free-form discussion about security in startups. There's, of course, I think startups really are pertinent to security right now because there's a lot of startups in security. Yeah. There's a lot of people with opinions about startups, about funding, about the technology, about adopting that technology. And we always have a great discussion here on Startup Security Weekly. I think this will be one of the first episodes that we'll put in the Security Weekly feed and test the waters on that. And I think moving into 2017, we'll have a solidified strategy that people will like based on feedback I've gotten about which shows are in there. And you're going to love the content on this show because it goes from talking about the security, like raw security, to talking about techniques that you can use in your own startup ideas. And what's interesting, I think that I firmly believe there's a lot of innovation that happens in security today. And not just when talking about companies, right? We've talked about this on the show in the past, Michael. A lot of us in security, we got these great ideas. We come up with this new open source project, this new technique, and I believe over the past 11 years that I've been, doing the shows and paying attention closely to the security community is that we've got to be able to market our ideas. We've got to be able to position them. We've got to be able to make sure people pay attention to them. And it's almost like you have a startup when you're releasing that open source project, when you're promoting yourself to go speak at a conference. I think these are all ideas that we can use in security. We talk a lot about communication, which is important. So I like I like our mojo on this show, Michael. And I was actually telling someone about like how the show's been going. I'm like, I don't know, Michael and I, we just get together and we talk. And I'm like, you know what? We're not going to mess with that. We're going to get together and we're just going to talk. So
yeah, and look, I'll be a complimentary. Doug joining us on this is a blast. The conversations that we have when Doug is with us are exciting, and they get me excited. If I can add my stamp to it, the way I've started looking at it is that we're going to explore the business of security while advancing the security of business. So if you're a startup and you're a security-focused startup, then of course we want to chat with you and about you and amplify your successes. But if you're a startup going, do I need to worry about security? Then we want to talk to you too. And we're trying to figure it out. And so what we try to do with every show is look at some of the trends and the way that things are going. And then we do talk about communication and we talk about leadership because those things matter. But as we've been doing it, what I'm also finding is what sometimes we define as the buyer, right? The business level buyer, typically the CISO or somebody in that technology part of the organization, they are loving startup mentalities. I've got a leadership summit coming up next year that at a conference, Paul, you and I both go to and participate. And one of the things we're going to add to it is like a startup mentality track. There's a mindset to it. In this show, we get to cover all this. We get to talk about business and communication and leadership and security, but we can look at it from a bunch of different angles, and it gets exciting. And I think we're finding a stride that's kind of fun. So
the feedback that I've gotten too definitely I think underscores the point that with all of our shows, right, we're the ones doing security. And in the startup show, it kind of just so happened that when we launched the show, I have my own security startup.
Yeah.
Michael's launching a new venture, and so he's treating that much like that is really a startup for you.
I'm in startup mode, and I am learning so much.
It is a learning process. And Doug and I mean, we've got some announcements coming up. There's going to be a startup kind of mentality that's going to have to apply to our new project. Because we're kind of treating that as another startup. So
I've consulted with everything from tiny little startup things to multinationals. So I've done a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's a really exciting area to be in. I think. It's also a very scary area to be in. Startup is just like it's like I don't know. It's like self-surgery.
Yeah. Here we go. There we go.
It's both thrilling and terrifying at the same time.
But a startup, if you're not scared doing your startup, you're doing it wrong. Like,
absolutely.
You got to have. There's just that air of excitement. Some people just like to go from startup to startup, and I can see that because there's a lot of adrenaline rush, but that's not just like an adrenaline rush like riding a roller coaster. It's like the adrenaline rush of like doing something really dangerous with no, like jumping off of a cliff into the water kind of thing. So it's very interesting. I think one of the things I want to start with is the CEO of Palo Alto, Mike McLaughlin, made some statements recently on Bloomberg that said that it was incredibly difficult for new security companies to get funding, for startups to get funding. And there's a continuing trend of companies going public because money is so tight. Now, I follow security companies and security startups very, very closely. I use actually a tool called Owler, which we've mentioned on the show before.
We gave our secret away.
We gave our secret away. We gave it away on Enterprise. I had people ask me on Twitter, what was that tool that you mentioned? So the cat's out of the bag. That's and props to the people at Owler. They're doing a fantastic job doing this kind of a social company tracking tool. And from what I've seen, I've seen a lot of companies get funding. I've personally spoken with people who run venture funding companies that are focused on security, stating that in up to this point in the year they've invested in 30 companies. So certainly there's money to be found. Yeah. What I find interesting is that when people ask me, hey, Paul, when are you going to take funding? And my response is, well, I want to get some sales first. And they just laugh. They're like, you're doing it wrong. I mean, they're not, telling me I'm doing it wrong, but they're like, oh, you're doing it wrong. You should do it more like Silicon Valley. Like, just fund your idea and worry about sales.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know, 5 years after you've taken multiple rounds of funding. And so it's interesting, the different strategies. But we all, I think, are on the same page. We disagree with Michael McLaughlin in that there is funding out there for security companies.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's certainly, I've seen people get funding. I've had people come talk to me about, here's what I'm trying to do. What do you think? And, there's angel investors out there that want to put money behind these things. Mm-hmm. I think the secret to it, the initial secret to it is just having something tangible. And it's difficult in security because it's supposed to be visionary.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to be thinking about the next big thing. Mm-hmm. And when you go try to present that to a person, it's a huge challenge because you go in and talk about some very, minutia kind of thing that's this little niche. You have to convince them that it's a valid niche and that there's a customer for that niche out there. And that's sometimes pretty challenging when you start talking about weird technology stuff, especially when it's visionary weird technology stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's sometimes limiting. But maybe this guy is just, unhappy because he got turned down for something. So
yeah,
he's the CEO of a company that's doing well, and they did an $85 million round in the last year or so. But so I think for somebody like him, he's watching FireEyes stock drop precipitously, and so that means he's got a lot of pressure. Or I said they did a round. My bad. He went IPO, so they're going to look at him and go, well, how are you performing? And I think that so he said a couple things that are interesting to kind of unpack separately, right? So one is it's hard for a startup to get funded. I all of us don't agree, and I'd actually like to go back to it because Doug said a couple things there that I thought were really interesting that I think are opportunities that even this show can try to help address. The second part to it then is he talked about how people aren't going the route of the IPO. Well, one of the articles that I've got queued up that we'll have to get to in the next week or two is that's a trend, but that's not indicative of a lack of funding or a problem in the space. Mm-hmm. It's actually the new trend is that everybody's not looking at it from that perspective. And I think one of the things that we're seeing happen a lot in security right now is what I'd call the consumption model of it, right? The mergers and acquisitions, or the acquisition just part of it, and there's a lot of that happening. I mean, how many of the security companies right now are getting spun out and sold to other companies, and getting sold to holding companies, and getting leveraged out and getting combined in? And I think that we're at a space where, although collectively the three of us have been doing this a really long time, from an industry perspective and from an investing perspective, this is new. This is all still new, and people are trying to shake their way out of it.
A couple of things. I think that technology has always had a strong culture around startups, right? I mean, that started with the dot-com boom. And I think, it's gone through fits and starts, but for the most part, technology is advancing, and there are companies that are doing some awesome technology, and there's a lot of startups in technology. I think security is going to grow alongside of it. I don't think it's trailing. It might be trailing behind it depending on the sector you're talking about, but I think we're always going to see, as technology advances, security is going to have to advance too, and to me that means new companies and startups and maybe acquisitions and mergers and things like that, but there's always going to be a lot of things happening as long as technology advances. I don't see that slowing down.
I agree with that. I think there's one of the more limiting factors of security is that it's a service base as opposed to technology, which just solves a problem. Security is about service. It's about providing support to, and it does solve a problem, but it's not as easy of a sell as saying, I built a better mousetrap, I will catch more mice. You're saying, I've got this way to support the mousetrap industry that needs to be put in place. So it's a little bit of a harder sell, and it tends to trail a little bit because a lot of investors and companies don't get involved in this as quickly until they start seeing these things happen and they realize there's a problem. So unlike where I can take something out and say, this is very tangible, security is always this kind of foggy thing that's in the background. So it's a little bit of a harder sell, I think, to an investor.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about that from an investor's perspective, and I think Doug, you've encapsulated it well. When you go look at investment today, they're looking to know that you're going to give them a 10-time return on their investment in the next 5 years. That's the gold standard that they're looking for. And so, one of the things that we talk about, it's this concept I call idea to execution. And you got to have 5 Ps. You got to have your product or your prototype or your solution. You got to have a pitch. You got to have a plan that's going to get me to that 5 to 10 times revenue. You've then got to have proof that, especially in security, that it works, or something other than it's an idea that you drew on a napkin and you're really excited about it. And then you have to have some way of protecting it. So is what you're doing, is there an intellectual property protection to it, or otherwise you're doing security? I mean, if you think about this is kind of fascinating. If you were in the professional space of security a decade ago and you wanted to go get errors and omissions insurance, good luck. And or somebody would write it for you. It was really expensive. I had a buddy come to me recently and say, hey, do you have E&O? We got talking about it, and I was like, dude, that's going to cost you an arm and a leg. Now, his quote was like $900 a year.
Oh, yeah.
I was
wow.
like, oh.
Yeah, that's way down, because I was one of the early ones with error and emissions insurance doing pen testing.
So what's happened is that industry has learned, right? They've figured out the pieces, and so now they understand. But when you say to investors security, they're going to go, wait a minute, so are you a hacker? Are you guys things? And when you say cyber, they like it. They know it's sexy. They know it's not going to go away. They know it's going to continue to build. But what does that mean? And so I think that puts a burden. If you're a security startup, you've got to not just hit those 5 Ps. You've then got to translate that into an experience that an investor understands and can feel comfortable with.
I don't know where to go from there. Sorry. I had a mental lapse.
I can always fill in.
Thanks, Doug. I'm just sitting here enjoying my cigar, listening to you guys talk.
I can talk forever about almost anything with absolutely no content. I was
perfect for podcasting.
Perfect. I know. That's they keep telling me. I was talking to some people recently about how actuarials and insurance are getting heavily involved in this industry, and that's going to drive a lot of startup stuff too. Because one thing about that's driving down the cost of insurance. Because initially, when a lot of us went to look at E&O way back when, the first time I asked about E&O, they were like, "You're doing what?"
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
I mean, that was what he said. He said, "You're doing what?" And I
they
said,
came back and
well,
they went,
we're
sorry, we don't wait for that.
yeah, I said, we're doing like security break-ins. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Huh, no, absolutely not. No, there's none of that here, none of that here. And I was like, wait, I didn't just admit, wait. And, you wondered if the guy's already hitting the panic button under the desk. And today, yeah, exactly. But today, that price of that, has just come down, and you're starting to see big player insurance getting involved in this field, which means they're going to further, and it's going to help startups a lot, because as that stuff stabilizes, the terminology, and I don't mean the specifics of your startup, but the terminology of the industry starts to stabilize, and people start having a lingo for it in finance and other things, and you'll start hearing people on Wall Street talk about, well, this is what that is, and this is where that fits, and they start categorizing, and that means as a startup, you've got a much easier road to financing, because when you talk to an investor, they kind of, as long as you keep your terminology straight, they're expecting those 5 Ps, and now you've got a set of lingo you have to give them in those 5 Ps, and then they'll be able to understand exactly what you're talking about.
You know what I love? One of the things we do here in the state of South Carolina, we've got a new consortium stood up, and one of the people who's on our advisory board is active in the insurance market, and he is so excited about being part of cyber, and has admitted that he's still learning. But I'll tell you, the number one claim in the last year for insurance relative to cyber?
I don't. I probably should, but I don't know what it is.
No idea.
Lost laptop.
Yeah, I should have known that.
I could see that.
Yeah, well, me too, right? But here's the thing I took from it. He had another one that was also marginally interesting, and I frankly don't remember. Oh, it was insider theft, like somebody leaving the company and stealing information. That was their number 2 claim. So here's the thing that I find fascinating about that, though. So we have a lot of industry reports that come out, and some we like, some we deride, and some we just kind of say, okay, they're interesting. But what's cool about the insurance company is that these are actual claims. These are things that they're writing. Yeah. And so what I love about it is they're going to go into the organizations, and they're going to write the policy. Well, once they get burned, and they're good at not getting burned, they're going to get smarter about the questions that they ask. So if you're a startup today, in security or otherwise, if you can pay attention to what the insurance industry is doing, you are going to learn about it, because, look, they're going to tell you where they're paying out the claims. If you can help them reduce the payout from claims, they're going to like you. And if what you're doing is helping their customers solve problems that reduces the payout of claims, then you run the opportunity where somebody says, you know what, if you're using XYZ technology, we'll give you a discount on your premium.
Yep.
If you can do that,
and that's a big avenue, and it always has been, because actuarials know everything. I mean, they can predict the future very accurately, and they will do so with security. They will very quickly start to learn where are the big threat vectors. And so, yeah, I think riding herd on that kind of mentality is going to really give you a lot of startup opportunities, because you can see where you can push that right in there.
That's an interesting strategy for a security company, and we'd be out of sorts if we didn't talk about Shark Tank at least once during the show.
Shark Tank in
Silicon Valley. They're staples for conversation starters on our show. But I was watching Shark Tank, and they had this app. And you know how apps get scrutinized by investors, because there's like especially 50 billion apps. Yeah, especially Mark Cuban. But Mark was interested in this one because he said, well, we make this app, and it's for people to improve their own personal health and fitness. And it gives them a fitness program. And they were like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But then they like pull out of their back pocket. They're like, by the way, we've partnered with insurance companies that can reduce a premium for companies that adopt this app. And then all of a sudden the checkbooks come out, and they're like, that is a totally sold, right? They got funding. So I think for security, that is a very interesting strategy for security companies to say, if we can kind of work with that angle as an aspect of what we provide, that is extremely powerful.
Coming soon to a venue near you. I mean, because all those big players are starting to get involved in that. I've had conversations about it, and that means that when the actuarials start predicting, they're gonna do just what you said. They're gonna say, if you have seatbelts in your car, you get a discount. Well, guess what? You want to be the guy selling seatbelts right about then, because you're going to sell a lot of seatbelts, and whoever's selling what they're going to want. Because they're going to identify, because that's the actuarials that got the crystal ball, and they're going to identify, here's the 5 most critical things that exist in the world. And once they've done that, that's going to be the biggest markets for new security products for a while, because people are going to say, I have to have this, whatever it is. I have to have this because I get this much money off. And everybody's going to be shopping for one. And so if you got the product, you're going to be there.
It's kind of similar to how PCI changed
Absolutely.
the security industry as well, right? I mean,
Exactly.
that caused all kinds of new companies because it was basically a requirement or part of some regulations, a very similar kind of thing.
And yeah, regulation's the other thing to monitor, because things like Sarbanes or HIPAA or whatever start driving that stuff as well. And a lot of those things are very nebulous, so they're still not clarified as to what exactly you must do. I mean, there's a lot of verbiage about that. But as regulation like that starts coming down from on high, you're going to see stuff from the federal government saying cities and towns and states must do this. They have to do this to protect taxpayer data, or now as we see election machines, voting machines. How do you protect that? Well, there's going to be requirements from the Federal Elections Commission saying you must do this. So if you're the person that's ready to sell that product, you're going to sell a lot of product, because they're going to come in and say you got to have it, and every city, state, and town in the United States is going to be calling you going, can I get one of those? Because we got to have it. It says so right here.
And selling is hard for a startup.
I was going to say that's the thing. I mean, because even if somebody else says you need it, I'm coming in and I'm telling you that you're going to have to take money that you have. In fact, this is one of the things that we talked about, Paul. It was really interesting for me when I went from concept to launch. Look, when you're in your concept phase and you're talking to people, it's easy for somebody to say, man, I love that. I love the sound of that. That looks great, man. Good job. I'll happily pay you when it's ready. But then when you flip the switch and say, okay, it's ready, and they go, oh, yeah. Would you look at the clock? Whoa, bad time. I got. It sounds great though. I'm on board. Check in with me in a month. It sounds really good, and they just kind of slip away. You've got to really then start looking at how are you explaining it? How does it work? And so what's kind of interesting is, Doug's right in the things to look at, and I think then that where we have an opportunity as an industry too is to police the charlatans that are no doubt going to jump in. And that's where we get to have some of those conversations and those questions about, right, so you help me solve XYZ problem. Cool, how do you do it? And if you're the company who does it well from a technology perspective, great. Then make sure you've invested almost as much time in explaining it so people understand it. You do that, you're going to be good.
I want to just some of the things that I've heard in this discussion made me think about that creating or solving a new problem is really hard, and we do a lot of that in security. I think this is very relevant to security companies and startups and even consumers of security products, is that a lot of times when you talk about being innovative as a startup, we're trying to create something new. We're trying to create a new need. And we've seen that in the commercial space as well. Like, I don't know that I have this problem, but here's a solution for it. That's really hard. And what we've tried to do in our own startup, and I think more people should do and not be afraid to what we're talking about with regulations and insurance, but is to latch on to something. And as I'm researching the landscape and trying to position my own product in the market, we've decided to latch on to certain technologies that are already being adopted by companies and be a complement to that, be able to extend that, and be able to integrate with that right out of the gate. And that makes it much easier for everyone, for the customer and for the startup, because creating new is hard. In our own case, we've latched onto the Bro IDS. And now the play to investors that I'm hoping is that we can show the installations with that and show the other integration points that we might have and how easy it is for people who already have technology to adopt our technology and immediately start getting benefit. So that helps you with investors. It also helps you with customers, because they're like, oh yeah, like I have Bro. That's cool. You guys can just like do that for me. And then what we find out is that we might be replacing or extending what they've already built in-house. We had that discussion before. And I think that's a really good play, especially for a startup. One of the other things I was thinking about, what's really hard and what I've seen a lot of companies really struggle with is, now let's say they get those inroads, right? And they want to say, well, now we want to expand out to the enterprise and reach different audiences. That's where I've seen companies struggle, and I've seen them basically either get bought out or go by the wayside because they started with one audience and now they're trying to do something completely new and extend it. I've seen that be very, very difficult.
Well, there's a subtle issue there. Large organizations always have done this, where they come up with an idea and they convince you that you need it. So this is what a large company can do. They say, okay, we're gonna make this stuff out of horses' hooves, and we're gonna put artificial flavor and color in it, and let's call it Jell-O. You don't need it, but we're gonna sell it to you.
Because there's always room for jelly.
Because you want it. You don't really need it. And that's a danger for startups is to try. And that's why they have trouble is they try to move into another segment because they don't have the resources that a giant company has to go out and hire a Madison Avenue marketing firm to create an ad campaign to say, you really need deodorant. You know, I mean, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Probably you do. I don't know, you know. But I mean, and so security is a tougher sell like that because if you're a startup, you don't have those resources. And as you go into that new segment, now you're trying to convince somebody who doesn't know they need something that they do need it, whether they need it or not. And if you don't have massive resources to put behind it, so you have to be I think you have to be careful as you try to expand out of those segments because you know you need it here.
Right.
I'd really like to sell it over there. Maybe we better wait a little bit till we get a few more resources here and then pour some into that marketing and try to sell that to those guys on the other side of the table, which is why I'm not good at startups because I don't take big chances and just say, you know, honey, I hawked the whole house. You know.
But yeah, I'll tell you what, though. There's something that's interesting about that. So what's defined a lot of my startup of late is looking at how to help technologists better think about this type of stuff and then prove their leadership, get what I call straight talk and talking about stuff. So I launched the course. I am learning so much. I'm so excited about being able to do it. And recently I've been reading about the need to be able to relaunch courses, right? Because now that I'm learning about it, I've made adjustments and I'm starting to understand that I probably should have charged a lot more for it and that there's some different features I can add to it. Oh, and there's a better way to explain this and this. And basically somebody said, you've got to ask yourself 3 questions. And I don't have it in front of me, but from memory, it was kind of like, are there people who still need what you do, but that probably don't know yet that you exist? Are there people who know that you exist and are likely customers that are not yet customers? And then I, frankly, at the moment, don't remember the 3rd question, but it was kind of like, if the answer to any of those is yes, then stay on station. Do that until such time as you've exhausted that and it's time to go someplace else. And I think that's essentially what you're talking about, Doug. And even we go look at what they call the tech unicorns, and Paul knows I hate that as a phrase. But like
I love unicorns.
You look at Uber or you look at Airbnb, which are usually held out as the 2 big ones, that created a new market based on challenges that people had. It was kind of fascinating, but even they stayed on station very tight and narrow until it was, okay, now I have people in more cities begging for this, and okay, we can make it work. Boom, let's go. And so I think that's an interesting thing in security because a lot of times when people call me on the other side of the fence and they want to pitch me whatever they're working on so I can write about it, and I just ask them, okay, well, what's the problem that you solve? Well, there's APT out there and there's cloud, and so like I connect the APTs to the cloud to keep you safe. And I'm like, what? Like, who the hell? I don't want to disclose the company, but I got one the other day.
Oh no!
And it was so bad. I posted it up to some friends, and they all read it. They're like, "Is this indicative of the typical pitch that you get?" I was like, "Yep." It was like, "Look, we've created a video game like interface, and you can go back to
No, they did not say video game like interface. No.
Oh, I can't make this up.
No.
And they were telling us that like they've made it fun and blah blah. I was like, look, I don't want fun at work. I'm funny at work. I'm good. Yeah. I just want stuff that works.
Right.
So needless to say, I declined the pitch. Like I was like, no, please don't.
They need to go listen to our previous episodes on how to do a pitch. Not that I think we're,
You know what I'm going to start
doing? The world's foremost experts on it, but
when I get crappy pitches, I'm just going to send them links.
Yeah.
Go watch the show.
Go watch the show.
Come back.
Oh boy.
Well, I've heard a lot of crappy pitches, and not for startups necessarily, but I've often sat on boards and things for companies just to be their like translator. I used to do this weird job, and I translated engineering into congressionalese. And because the engineers couldn't talk to Congress and they'd always lose their funding, and they go to these pitches and they would go, "I'm going to begin with some calculus now. Everybody does understand multivariate calculus, correct?" And it's like the House subcommittee on oil or something, and the guy's like, "I don't know. My daddy used to own a gas station down in South Texas," and and they're like, "Yeah, you're going to lose your funding right now."
Well, that's like when we do our pitch for our startup. We've got this patented algorithm that uses Fourier transforms, and I'm like, never say that when we're doing a pitch.
I would strongly discourage
unless there's a technical person in the room, like, do not say that. And make sure that if you do say that you explain the high level first. And then if you look at the tech guy, but sometimes you can look at the tech guy, like, and they still have that security people always have that skeptical look on their face. And you say Fourier transforms, and they're like, oh yeah, now you've just kind of won over the technical person. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's rules, but rules are meant to be broken. So I've found ourselves kind of making these rules, but then breaking them in certain circumstances.
I wouldn't break that one very often because you start saying Fourier transforms, you pretty quickly find yourself, outpaced by the guy who was giving out free hats.
Yeah.
Well, and I find too that on those heels, if you find that you utter the phrase, "Well, we sell to the smartest person in the room," all right, it's time to retool.
Yeah, that always goes over so well when you look at that one guy and all the others, and you're going, yeah, I try to talk to the smartest person in the room. And the rest of you just sort of sit there and hum jingles to yourself for a while.
Thanks for being here. I know you guys are the ones that sign the checks, but I'm just going to talk to the smart guy for a couple minutes.
Yeah, pitches we've talked a lot about pitches on the show, which is kind of, they're always interesting.
It's critical. I mean, a great pitch person can sell a terrible product, and a lousy pitch person can fail to sell a wonderful product. And I've seen both those where I was sitting there going, I understand what this poor guy's talking about, and all these board members who will make the decision on this, regardless of what I say, are going, don't know what that boy's talking about, but something's seriously wrong with him, and then I wouldn't let my, and you're going, no, this is really smart stuff. I mean, and there's a fine line though. You can play that where they actually become convinced that you're brilliant.
Yes.
I call this the weirdness effect. So it's like, the weirder you are in like being a professor, people go, he must be damn smart. So people think I'm really smart all the time. And because, they're like, that guy's so strange. And sometimes it sort of slips over into that. And the board people start going, I'm really scared of this guy. We better hire him. But usually not.
Or they're just trying to steal ideas. Like in Silicon.
Well, yeah.
I mean, just reminded of that scene in Silicon Valley where they're doing their pitch and then they start asking technical questions. And then he starts like writing all the math and algorithms on the board. And the other guy, I can't remember his name, like starts wheeling the whiteboard out of the room. It's like, we're going to leave now.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thanks for your pitch. We'll be in touch.
Then they start launching a similar product.
Or people are copywriting your work like on their computers while you're presenting it to them. Like, oh yeah, it's like us buying domain names, right? I know he does that. I do it too. I was like sitting there going, I already licensed. I did that. I did it the other day. I was at a meeting and I licensed the domain they were talking about while they were presenting it. And the guy was like, let's see if that's available. I was like, it's available, but I already bought it. Yeah. He was like, what? And I was like, I just bought it. And I also bought it backwards.
Yeah, so, there you go.
I always buy them backwards.
Just in case they're going to be cool with it.
Well, just so it's like Illuminati backwards, because wouldn't it's so cool to own that? If you type Illuminati.com backwards, you go to the NSA because there's a guy in Utah that owns it, and he just puts a link into it, so it's funny and it freaks people out all the time. So it's like I want to be sure I own it if anything cool comes up.
Well, one of the things I do want to see when we talked about creating a new market. And creating a problem. Basically, you're creating a problem and then creating the solution, right?
Yep.
More so, you're making people aware of a problem. And I think what really helps are those first big examples, those first big deals that you do, and those are some of the hardest to get. But once you have a couple of those, then you're kind of on your way to doing that. And one great example that I thought of is actually the sponsor of one of our other shows, Pony Express. They make devices that monitor Bluetooth and wireless, and people, I think, are still struggling with how much of a problem that really is. They monitor IoT devices. That's slowly becoming more and more of a problem that people are starting to care about, but not so much in enterprises. However, a couple of episodes ago on Enterprise Security Weekly, Paul Padgett said, well, we sold our technology to the Super Bowl. And I'm like, really? That's interesting. He's like, yeah, like the tablets that they use on the sidelines.
Right.
We knew all the MAC addresses, and we were looking for any anomalies that were happening. And then he said, the ticket scanners that were scanning everyone's ticket going to the Super Bowl, like they're wireless too. So we were monitoring all of those and making sure there were no anomalies. And I'm like, oh, if as a startup or anyone that has a startup out there could have a compelling story like that of your product in action, it invokes so much confidence in your product.
Right.
But those are hard to get. I have props to Pony Express for doing
especially to keep in mind, right? Saying, hey, so my uncle has this corner store and stuff, and I helped him with his computer. I guess it's just an example, but to your point, you get to say, so have you heard of the NFL? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we do all the XYZ for them. The people are like, oh,
right. Exactly.
Because what you're trying to do in those stories and those examples is you're connoting not just the value of that brand, but people assume the NFL doesn't just do stuff. Like if they're going to work with you, they vetted you, they figured it out. Oh, so they went through that and it's working. and you can cite them as a customer or a client or a case study, oh, okay then. Well, a lot less risk for me. Because that's really what we're talking about. But this is the thing that's interesting is we always think that the companies that are looking at startups are worried about the risk of the startup. It's not. It's personal risk. It's that person who's signing on that dotted line, right? You won't get fired for buying IBM. You won't get fired for buying Cisco. It's not because Cisco or IBM are so well known. It's that because if something goes wrong, frankly, you can blame them, and they'll take that blame and or fix it or whatever. It all kind of works out. So it's that person is sitting there. It's the operative part wasn't the company name. It's the you won't get fired by. So when somebody's looking at your technology, just keep in mind when you're pitching it, you're not just pitching, this will help your company. You have to help them assess the personal risk. And I sometimes just hit it head on and say, so what are you worried about? Are you worried about looking like an idiot? Are you worried about blowing the money? And sometimes you find a person say, yeah, dude, I just don't know.
Yeah, I've had exactly those conversations with potential customers, and we've talked about this in the show in the past that, security people especially, we've gotten burned, by vendors. And I mean, whatever. I mean, it happens. I'm not trying to pick on anyone, but we have had these experiences where we've tried to adopt this technology. And I mean, this extends to IT, right? You try and adopt this technology. Right. And either it's just not the right fit, or the product doesn't work as you expected, or whatever the case may be, and that project falls down. The person who adopted that technology and was the champion for that vendor looks really bad.
Yep.
And when Michael brings up an excellent point, when you're giving your pitch, you have to win that person over in terms of confidence in your own product.
Well, I used to do a lot of work for people that were doing juries. And one thing about juries that they'll teach you is trust is what it's all about. If you're an expert and you're talking to a jury, the jury rarely knows the details of what you're talking about because you're talking about blood or DNA or bullets or computer technology. But the jury or statistics, the jury has to trust you. And if they do, and it's the same thing in a pitch, you're trying to convince them, and it's really a con, which, confidence is where a con comes from. It's really the pitch is convincing them to have confidence in you, even though they don't truly understand what you're going to do. Say, just trust me, this will work out. And that's what the pitch ends up being all about, whether you're doing expert testimony or you're trying to sell a startup to a bunch of investors, because they're not going to really get to the bottom level of it. They're just going to get to the sort of edge, and they have to look at it and see it as this nice, happy, glowing thing. Instead of this, I don't know. So some of it's just about how you sell it.
The struggle for me in security, and I think for a lot of companies, and I've worked with a lot of not just startups that have this problem, is so to overcome this, right, one of the things you can do is offer a free trial.
Yeah.
Right? Or let them try it for free. Now, the problem with a lot of security solutions are that this trial might solve the problem for you. And yeah. That's great. Like, why do I need to buy it now? Like, you just found a bunch of compromised systems in my environment. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Now we know what to look for.
Well, so let's flip this around for a second too, and let's look at it a little bit from a culture perspective. So, because we talk about the business of security as well. So if you're that person who's there, maybe you've got an idea, and at some point you're going to do a startup, and of course we'd love to support you in that process. But right now you're in an enterprise or you're in that organization looking at this. We need to do a better job as an industry of supporting startups, of actively seeking it. And Paul, on this program so far, we've highlighted companies that invite startups in and that have innovation support and do that type of stuff. And we're seeing more of it, and that's great. So now take that same mindset and adopt it. And we've got to let people off the hook and say, look, I have a tolerance. In fact, that's one of the questions I've started asking people. And it's great because some of them don't know, but they'll go find out. And I'll say, what is your tolerance? What is the risk? What's the small bet you're willing to place on a new technology so that you don't get burned? And I'm finding it varies, but I'll be blunt. It's usually between $25,000 and $50,000. And so what that means then as a startup is if you can offer them value at that price point, then that they can then build on, they'll do that. And so to unpack that from the other side, what that's saying to your organization is, okay, we can spend some money. We can make an investment. And you know what? They're not all gonna work out. When an investor says, I want a 10-time return in 5 years, they know 50% of that portfolio is absolutely gonna fail. And what they're really counting on are 2 or 3 are gonna hit that mark and 1 is gonna take off. They're hoping that out of any 10, 1 is gonna just poof, go. Okay, well, why don't we adopt that same strategy in our companies when we're looking at startups and technologies? Now, maybe your threshold for risk is 10,000, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 100. But I'd love to start seeing more of that and seeing more conversation around that, because that's when we can look at some of these startup technologies and say, okay, I get it, you're new. Look, I've had some people reach out to me recently and say, hey, I love the stuff that you're doing. Can you come work with me? And I'll tell you what, I'll be a testimonial for you. You can use me as a case study, and I'm going to help you get some additional clients. They didn't even have to ask for a discount at that point. I was like, yes, and how would you like to structure that up? Because as you point, that's a huge deal for me. But what it also is it's real. It's real insight into how it's all working out. So if we're serious about supporting security startups and supporting startups that have better security, then we also have to figure out in our organizations how to get past that mentality of, well, this would look like a failure for me. I would want it to be more like, wait, so everybody we went with is a proven technology vendor. We didn't try anything new this year? Okay, we made a mistake here. How do we fix that?
No, I agree. I
agree with that too. I think that's a good idea, and I think you do have to keep people stretching if you want the industry to develop. Because
it's somewhat self-serving for me, though.
Well, of course it is, but
yeah, I think that's a good idea. My name is Paul.
I think that's great. Sales at offensivecountermeasures.com. Yes.
It's called 1-800-PAUL.
1-800-PAUL startup.
but no, I think it's important to support this stuff. I mean, it's not self-serving for me, but it's really a good idea to keep these things growing, and that's where innovation comes from. I mean, you're just not going to get that much innovation from very large organizations that are stable and they're very concerned about shareholders and shareholders getting nervous because we're going to invest all this money in this thing. Plus, I think the more size you have, the bigger the mistakes you can make.
Yeah, it's true.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Richard Branson talks about that. I don't mean to step on you, but one of the things I find fascinating is Branson says, we're a billion, he's a billionaire, we're a multi-billion company, and he has these fantastic programs where if you've got an idea, he'll fund it. And his attitude is, if it fails, fine. I can tolerate that failure. And then you can come back and work with us. And by the way, you're smarter and you know more about it. But by the way, if it works, well, then that's great because you're still part of the family. Wow. I think that's a great concept.
It is a great concept. If more people are doing that, though, I mean, you are seeing more, very wealthy people starting to fund things like that. And because a lot of them are technology people and they came from that background, which was more of a community-oriented kind of thing. And I think that helps and then a lot of people know each other too. So, and that helps. And it's not just a bunch of strangers. So,
Michael, update us on your journey really quickly.
I'm going to do more writing on this. I tell you, so I launched and we've got the intro class going through the Straight Talk framework. And I'm humbled. I'm humbled by the whole experience and everything that's going on with it. And right now, I'm actually trying to pack some services and stuff around it. And I'm learning. Like, I'm actually going to rush and put something together in the next couple of days and just start talking to people about it and figure it out and kind of see where it goes. And I am planning a relaunch. I've learned some things. In fact, what I'll leave is this. One of the things that held me back for so long is that online learning didn't work for me. I figured out why. Most online teaching and learning is all consumption-based, but the way that we learn is experience. And what I started figuring out was how to shorten the consumption side to it and program more experience side into it, and it's really starting to work. Now, I'm not saying I got it nailed. I'm just saying I'm getting better with it. But one of the other things that happened to me this week was I started offering people one-to-one coaching sessions, and that's now going to be something I'm going to put into all of them going forward. Like it is working so well. So I know that means I will offer less. And I will have to figure out other ways to scale. But in the short run, wow. Like I have probably 5 to 10 pages of notes every week just from the experience of going through this. And I only wish I had done it sooner. So if you're in a startup mode, that we've talked about this, right when you think, okay, I'm almost ready, that means you're probably past ready, go. Just go and be upfront with people where you're at and then just brace for it because it's fun. It's a roller coaster, but it's fun. So that's where I'm at. Awesome. And I've narrowed the focus. This is it. I've got like a couple services around it, and I'm going to stay on this until we can get more people working through it, comfortable with the questions. I've got a lot of ideas now for how to revamp some of my marketing. I'm going to improve the course. Like I am really excited. That probably doesn't show, but
yeah, a little
so excited you can smell it.
Yeah, that's because I didn't need deodorant.
No, that's great.
Right.
Yeah, we're still chugging along at offensive countermeasures, obviously, and we're working on how we're going to sell and distribute the product, which is great because it means we have a product to sell. So it's exciting to be able to start working on that. So there's a lot of time spent in development and some more hands-on testing that needs to happen as version 1 is ready to release. It's kind of like a contractor. Developers tell you another 2 weeks. It's like that movie. What was the movie with Tom Hanks where the contractors kept telling him, like, it's two more weeks, 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks.
It's Money Pit.
Money Pit.
Money Pit.
Yeah. Yeah.
We know our movies here at Startup
That's
Weekly.
right. That's right. So, yeah, we've got version 1 getting ready to release this week and figuring out how we're going to sell it. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
I can't wait to see a demo, Paul.
We've got a lot of people interested. And, I need to get back. There's a couple of people who we're going to do, Michael included. Doug, I'll extend that to you as well, that we're going to give our pitch to and get feedback. So that'd be great.
I look forward to it. Yeah, and then I would just say, too, you and I have traded some emails. We got some ideas for some stuff that we can do here on a startup show and some ways to get some guests and get some we've looked at a couple different things that we can do to help both promote startups and promote the communication and leadership of startups. And so I'm excited about some of the stuff that we got planned. And I know that's a little obtuse, so stick with us.
I put Katie Mazuris on the spot because she's like, hey, I'm working for a startup. And I'm like, hey, you should come on Startup Security Weekly. So hopefully we can work on Katie. And she's awesome. We did a healthcare segment on Paul's Security Weekly, which was very, very, very exciting. I'm super proud of that segment. Thanks to Josh Corman and Katie Mazuris. We've also got Michael, I can't remember his last name, who wants to come on the show as well, who found that one of our segments really resonated with him. And he was part of a security startup that is part of a pretty large company now. And I'll save that as a surprise for later as well. So there's some more guests that we'll be bringing on the show, which we're very excited about.
Oh, and I've got 2 rounds of listener feedback where people have helped us better understand technical debt. And we have permission to use his insights. And it actually really helped me understand it better. And so it was just didn't get a chance for this week. And then some other listener feedback and engagement on setting up security-focused startup mastermind groups and ways for people to work together. Nice. I want to go explore that because I think that's really cool.
Excellent. Well, thanks to Doug, our very special guest, for this episode of Startup Security Weekly. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.